Let me ask you something real quick. You walk into a room. Maybe it's a party. Maybe it's a work event. Maybe it's a first date. And the moment you sit down across from someone, your mind goes completely blank. You can't think of a single thing to say. The silence stretches out. You feel your face getting warm. You start smiling awkwardly, nodding at nothing, pulling out your phone just to look busy. And somewhere in the back of your mind, that familiar voice whispers, "Why is this so hard for me?" Here's the truth nobody tells you. That voice is lying to you. You are not bad at conversation. You were never bad at conversation. What you are is untrained. And there is a massive life-changing difference between those two things. Think about the most magnetic people you've ever met. The ones who can walk into any room and within 5 minutes, everyone is laughing, everyone is leaning in, everyone is thinking, "Who is that person?" You probably assumed they were just born that way. Naturally charismatic. Naturally funny. Naturally gifted with words. Wrong. Malcolm Gladwell once said, "Practice isn't the thing you do once you're good. It's the thing you do that makes you good." The most compelling conversationalists in the world, the ones closing million-dollar deals, building unshakable friendships, walking away from every interaction leaving people energized, they learned a set of skills. They practiced a set of principles. And those principles are not locked away in some Ivy League communications course. They are right here, right now, in this audiobook. Over the next 10 chapters, you are going to learn exactly how to walk into any conversation with total confidence. You're going to learn why your brain freezes up and how to stop it cold. You're going to discover the specific techniques that make people instantly trust you like you, and, most importantly, want to keep talking to you. You'll learn how to ask questions that light people up, how to tell stories that hold a room, how to handle awkward silences like a pro, how to talk to strangers, to bosses, to people who intimidate you, and come out the other side feeling like $1 million. But here's what makes this audiobook different from everything else you've ever read or listened to on this topic. This isn't a theory. This isn't academic. This is not some stuffy communication textbook dressed up with a catchy title. Every single strategy in this audiobook is grounded in real human psychology, tested in real American living rooms and boardrooms and coffee shops and first dates. These are the tools that real people use to completely transform how the world sees them, and more importantly, how they see themselves. So if you've ever frozen up in a conversation and hated yourself for it, this is for you. If you've ever watched someone else work a room and thought, "I wish I could do that," this is for you. If you've ever felt invisible in a group, talked over in a meeting, or just plain awkward at a dinner table, this is absolutely 100% for you. Now, before we dive in, if this is your first time here at Mindset Audiobooks, hit that subscribe button right now. Every day, we bring you the tools, the frameworks, and the mindset shifts that help you build the life you actually want. And if you want to make sure you never miss a single one, hit the notification bell too. We are building something real here, and I am so glad you're a part of it. There's a study out of UCLA that found something that should stop all of us in our tracks. Researchers discovered that when people describe their biggest fears that genuinely keep them up at night, the fear of social rejection activates the exact same neural pathways as physical pain. Not similar pathways. The exact same ones. That means the anxiety you feel before walking up to someone at a networking event, the dread of making small talk at a family gathering, the panic of going blank in the middle of a sentence. Your brain is processing all of that the same way it processes getting punched. So yeah, this stuff is real. Your discomfort is not in your head. Well, technically it is, but it is neurologically real. And that means fixing it requires more than just being told to be yourself or just relax. It requires understanding what's actually happening inside you and then systematically rewiring it. That is exactly what this audiobook is designed to do. My name isn't important right now. What's important is what's about to happen to you over the next 2.5 hours. Because by the time we reach the final chapter, you are going to think about conversation completely differently. Not as something that happens to you, but as something you can architect, design, control. Let's set the stage for where most people are right now. The average American adult, and studies consistently back this up, feels lonely. Not just occasionally lonely, chronically, deeply, quietly lonely. A 2023 Surgeon General's advisory called loneliness in America an epidemic. Former Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy wrote that approximately half of American adults report measurable levels of loneliness. Half. And here's the brutal irony. We live in the most connected era in human history. We have smartphones in our pockets. We have social media platforms reaching billions. We can video call someone on the other side of the planet in 10 seconds. And yet people feel more disconnected, more unseen, more unheard than ever before. Why? Because technology gave us the ability to broadcast, but it never taught us how to actually connect. Real connection happens in conversation. It happens in the pause after someone says something vulnerable and you respond with genuine understanding. It happens when two people are talking and suddenly they both realize, oh, this person actually gets me. That is one of the most powerful experiences a human being can have. And it is available to you, right now, today, if you learn the right skills. One thing I want you to know before we begin. This audiobook doesn't ask you to become someone you're not. There's an entire industry built around telling introverts they need to become extroverts, telling quiet people they need to be louder, telling thoughtful people they need to be funnier. That's not what this is. This is about becoming more of who you already are, but expressed more powerfully, more clearly, more confidently. Some of the greatest conversationalists in history were introverts. Abraham Lincoln was famously reserved. Rosa Parks barely raised her voice. And yet both of them changed the world through the power of what they said and how they said it. You don't need to be loud. You need to be intentional. You don't need to be the life of the party. You need to be present enough that when you do speak, people actually stop and listen. That's the game we're playing here. And it starts, right now, in Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Conversation Myth. Why everything you've been told about talking to people is wrong. Here is the most dangerous lie ever told about human communication, and the reason millions of intelligent, warm, genuinely wonderful people walk through their entire lives feeling like they are somehow broken when it comes to talking to other people. The lie is this: great conversationalists are born, not made. You have heard this. You have probably believed this. And if you are being completely honest with yourself, you may have used it as a quiet explanation, or a quiet excuse, for why social situations feel so much heavier for you than they seem to for everyone else around you. You have watched someone work a room with total ease, laughing and connecting and making every single person feel like the most important human being on the planet. And somewhere deep in your chest, you thought, that person just has something I don't. Here is what nobody ever told you. They learned it. Every single skill you admire in a gifted communicator, the warmth, the ease, the ability to hold a room, the way they always seem to know exactly what to say, every bit of that was developed through exposure, through practice, through thousands of small interactions that slowly shaped the way their brain processes social situations. Just like a musician who makes a complex solo look effortless, or an athlete who makes a 40-yard pass look casual. The skill is real, but the naturalness is an illusion built on top of a mountain of invisible work. And the reason this particular myth is so uniquely destructive is because it stops people before they even begin. When you believe your social ability is fixed, when you accept, I'm just not a people person, as a permanent personality verdict, you stop trying to grow. You avoid the uncomfortable conversations. You leave the networking event early. You let the silence win. And every time you do, you quietly collect more evidence that confirms the lie, which makes the belief stronger, which makes the avoidance worse. It is a loop. A closed, self-reinforcing loop that has absolutely nothing to do with who you actually are, and everything to do with a story you were handed and never thought to question. Dr. Carol Dweck, the brilliant Stanford psychologist who gave the world the concept of the growth mindset, spent decades studying exactly this pattern. Her research showed, definitively, repeatedly, across thousands of subjects, that people who believe their abilities are fixed will consistently underperform compared to people who believe their abilities can expand through effort and learning. And here is the part that most people miss. Her findings apply just as powerfully to social skills as they do to academic performance or athletic ability. The moment your brain accepts that you can become a better communicator, it begins scanning the world differently. It starts noticing opportunities, absorbing lessons, and rewiring itself through every interaction. Not because of magic, but because belief shapes behavior and behavior shapes outcome. So before we go one step further, make a decision right now. Not a wish. Not a vague hope that maybe this audiobook will help a little. A genuine, grounded, non-negotiable decision. I am someone who can learn to connect powerfully with other people. That is true. It has always been true. And everything from this point forward is going to prove it to you. Now, let's talk about what is actually happening inside you when a conversation starts to fall apart. Picture a moment from your own life. Maybe it was a first date that started awkward and never recovered. Maybe it was a networking event where you stood near the food table a little too long. Maybe it was a work meeting where you had something to say, felt the window open, and watched it close without ever speaking. In all of those moments, what was actually going on in your head? For most people, the inner monologue sounds something like this. Am I being interesting? Do I sound nervous? Did that come out wrong? Are they bored? Why did I just say that? Should I change the subject? They probably want to leave. And the entire time that voice is running, you are completely unavailable to the actual human being standing in front of you. This is what psychologists call the spotlight effect, the deeply ingrained human tendency to believe that other people are watching us, evaluating us, and remembering our mistakes far more closely than they actually are. Researchers Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky at Cornell University ran a fascinating experiment on exactly this. They had participants wear an embarrassing t-shirt, one printed with Barry Manilow's face on it, and walk into a room full of other students. The participants guessed that roughly half the people in the room would notice the shirt. The real number? Less than 20%. Less than 1 in 5 people even registered it. The crowd is not watching you nearly as closely as you think. And once you truly absorb that, once it moves from intellectual understanding into something you actually feel, the entire social game changes. Because the anxiety that makes conversations painful, the self-consciousness that causes you to freeze up and go blank, is almost entirely constructed around a threat that does not exist at the level you believe it does. You are not under a spotlight. You are not being scrutinized and judged and remembered for every stumble. And the moment you stop spending your mental energy on defending yourself from that imaginary audience, you finally have enough attention left over to actually show up for the conversation. Which brings us to the single most important principle in this entire audiobook. Great conversation is not a performance. It is not about being funny enough, smart enough, interesting enough, or impressive enough. The best conversations, the ones that last for hours, that make you forget your phone exists, that you drive home from with that warm, full feeling in your chest. Those conversations happen when both people stop performing and start being genuinely, completely, unreservedly curious about each other. Curiosity is the master key. Not cleverness. Not a rehearsed story. Not the perfect opening line. Genuine human curiosity about the person sitting across from you. Think about the most meaningful conversations you have ever had in your life. Not the most entertaining, the most meaningful. Think about the people who made you feel the most seen, the most heard, the most valued. Were they the wittiest people you know? The most sophisticated? Or were they the ones who made you feel, for the duration of that conversation, like you were the most interesting person in the room? There is a reason Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, published in 1936, is still one of the top-selling books in American history, almost 90 years later. One of his core principles is devastatingly simple. become genuinely interested in other people. Not strategically interested. Not interested as a technique. Genuinely, warmly, actually interested. Because people can feel the difference immediately. They have always been able to feel the difference. And in a world where most people are half present, distracted, and already composing their next response before you finish your sentence, the person who is truly, fully listening stands out like a lighthouse. That is who you are going to become. Now let's close chapter 1 with something you can use before your very next conversation. Every chapter in this audiobook ends with a practical tool. Not theory, not inspiration, but a specific, immediately deployable technique. Because that is what actually creates change. This one is called the pre-conversation reset. Here is how it works. The next time you are about to walk into any situation that involves talking to people, a party, a work meeting, a first date, a phone call that makes your stomach tighten up, stop for 30 seconds before you walk in. Take 2 slow, full breaths. And then ask yourself one single question. What is genuinely interesting about the person I am about to talk to? Not what you are going to say. Not how you are going to come across. Not whether you will have enough topics to fill the silence. Just, what is interesting about them? Maybe you know something about their job, or their city, or something they mentioned last time you spoke. Maybe you know nothing at all, and the interesting thing is simply the mystery of who this person is. Either way, you are planting one seed of genuine curiosity before the conversation even starts. And that single seed will grow into an entirely different kind of interaction than the one anxiety would have produced. This shift, from self-focused to other-focused, is the entire foundation of everything we are going to build together in this audiobook. It will not make you perfect overnight, but it will make you present. And presence, it turns out, is the rarest and most magnetic quality a human being can bring into a conversation. The myth says you are either born with it or you are not. The truth says, you were always capable. You just needed someone to hand you the right tools and tell you to start building. Consider this your starting gun. In Chapter 2, we are going to tackle the fear that haunts people the most, the terror of running out of things to say. We are going to dismantle it completely, and I am going to give you a specific mental framework that means you will never again find yourself stranded in an empty silence, scrambling for words, wishing you were anywhere else. We are calling it the conversation engine. And once you have it, you will never leave home without it. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The Conversation Engine. How to never run out of things to say. Picture this scene for a moment. You are sitting across from someone at dinner. Maybe a first date, maybe a new colleague, maybe someone you genuinely want to impress. The conversation has been going fine. Actually, better than fine. There has been some laughter, some nodding, some real back and forth energy. And then, without warning, it just stops. The last topic runs dry. You both reach for your drinks at the same time. The silence lands between you like a dropped plate, and suddenly every coherent thought you have ever had in your entire life evaporates completely. You smile. They smile. Someone glances at their phone. And just like that, the momentum is gone. If that scenario made your stomach tighten even a little bit, good. That means you are human. Because the fear of running out of things to say is one of the most universal social anxieties in existence, and it affects people at every level of confidence, every level of education, every level of life experience. Corporate executives feel it. Comedians feel it. People who seem like they were born talking feel it behind closed doors. But here is what separates the people who recover from that silence gracefully from the people who spiral into panic. It is not that they have more interesting things stored up in their heads. It is that they have a system. And today, you are going to have that system too. We are calling it the conversation engine. A simple, flexible, endlessly renewable mental framework that gives you a reliable source of conversational fuel in any situation, with any person, at any moment. No memorized scripts. No rehearsed anecdotes on standby. Just a living, breathing structure your brain can lean on whenever the words start to run thin. Let's build it from the ground up. The first thing you need to understand is why the silence feels so catastrophic in the first place, because the reason is not what most people think. When a conversation goes quiet and you panic, your brain is not actually afraid of the silence itself. Your brain is afraid of what the silence means. It interprets the quiet as evidence that you are boring, that the other person is disappointed, that the connection is broken and cannot be repaired. That interpretation is what triggers the freeze. That is what drains every word out of your head and replaces them with white noise. But here is the truth. Silence is not a verdict. Silence is just a pause. And the way you respond to that pause, with ease instead of anxiety, with curiosity instead of panic, is entirely learnable. The first component of the conversation engine is what we call Ford +1. You may have heard of the classic Ford framework before. Family, occupation, recreation, dreams. It has been around for decades in communication coaching circles, and there is a reason it has survived. It works. These 4 categories cover the vast majority of what human beings actually care about, think about, and want to talk about. When a conversation stalls, any one of these 4 doors can open it right back up. Ask about family, not in an invasive way, but with genuine warmth. Are you from around here originally? Opens a door. Do you have people close by? Opens a door. People almost always have something to say about where they come from or who they belong to. Ask about occupation, and go deeper than what do you do? Try, what's the most interesting part of your work right now? Or what made you end up in that field? Those questions invite a story, not a job title. Ask about recreation, what they do when work is done, what they are watching, what they did last weekend. This is where people's real personalities live, and most people are genuinely delighted when someone asks about it. Ask about dreams. Carefully, contextually, not in a way that sounds like a life coaching session. But, is there something you've always wanted to try? Or where's somewhere you've always wanted to go? Can unlock a conversation that runs for an hour. Now, the +1 is what transforms Ford from a good framework into a great one. The +1 is current context. Whatever is happening around you, in the room, in the news, in the season, in the shared experience you are both having right now, that is always available as a topic because you are both already living it. The restaurant you are sitting in, the conference you both attended, the city you are both visiting. The weather, yes, even the weather, is not a boring topic if you use it as a bridge rather than a destination. This kind of cold reminds me of, is a bridge. Cold today, right? Is a dead end. Learn the difference, and you will never be stuck again. The second component of the conversation engine is the thread and expand technique. Every single thing a person says to you contains at least 3 invisible threads. 3 potential directions the conversation could go if you chose to pull on them. Most people only hear the surface of what someone says. Great conversationalists hear the threads underneath. Here is an example. Someone says, "I just got back from visiting my sister in Nashville." The average response, "Oh nice, how was it?" The thread and expand response finds 3 directions. First thread, the sister. Who is she? What is their relationship like? Second thread, Nashville. Have you been? What did they do there? Third thread, the trip itself. Was it a regular visit or a special occasion? Was it relaxing or chaotic? You do not ask all 3 at once. That is an interrogation, not a conversation. You pick the one that genuinely interests you most and you follow it. And when that thread runs its natural course, you loop back and pull the next one. Suddenly you are not scrambling for topics. You are mining them, and the other person is doing most of the work because you are drawing from the richest possible source material, their own life. This is what author and communication expert Charles Duhigg describes in his research on productive conversations. The idea that the best conversational partners are not the ones with the most to say, but the ones who are most skilled at listening for what hasn't been said yet. The unspoken follow-up. The story beneath the story. Pull that thread and you will rarely find yourself at a loss again. The third component of the conversation engine is the callback. This one is simple, devastatingly effective, and almost nobody uses it consciously. A callback is when you circle back to something that was mentioned earlier in the conversation, sometimes much earlier, and bring it back into the present moment. Let's say someone mentioned 20 minutes ago that they used to play college basketball. The conversation moved on, covered 3 other topics, and now there is a lull. You say, "Wait, I have to go back. You played college ball? Where? What position?" 3 things happen instantly. First, the silence is filled. Second, the other person feels genuinely heard, because you remembered something they said, which tells them you were actually paying attention. And third, the conversation develops a sense of depth and continuity, like you are not just exchanging information but actually building something together. Callbacks are one of the secret weapons of every truly magnetic conversationalist. They make an interaction feel less like 2 people taking turns talking and more like 2 people actually connecting. Now, let's put all 3 components together with one real-world scenario. You are at a work happy hour, the kind where you only know a handful of people and you end up next to someone you have never met. You introduce yourselves. You both work in different departments. There is the natural first question exchange. Names, roles, how long you have been with the company. And then it starts to plateau. You use Ford+1. What do you actually enjoy doing outside of work? They mention hiking. Thread and expand. You ask where they have hiked recently. They mention a trail in Colorado. You ask if they have always been into the outdoors or if it is something newer. They tell you a story about a camping trip that went sideways and now they are laughing. 20 minutes later, they mention they used to do stand-up comedy in college. You file that away. Half an hour into the conversation, there is a brief lull. You bring in the callback. Hold on, you did stand-up comedy and you hike mountains? What else don't I know about you? They laugh. They feel interesting. They feel seen. And you both leave that conversation with a specific warm feeling that comes from having genuinely connected with another human being. Not performed at them, not impressed them, but truly met them. That is the conversation engine in action. Simple, flexible, and available to you every single time. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. Before your next social event or meaningful conversation, take 2 minutes and write down 3 Ford+1 questions you could genuinely ask the person you are about to see. Not a script. Just 3 real questions rooted in actual curiosity. Then, during the conversation, practice finding at least 2 threads in everything they say and consciously choosing which one to follow. You will be stunned by how different the interaction feels, and how much less you worry about running out of things to say when you realize the other person's answers are already doing half the work for you. In Chapter 3, we are going to go one level deeper, because knowing what to say is only part of the equation. The other part, the part most people completely underestimate, is knowing how to listen. And we are not talking about politely waiting for your turn to speak. We are talking about the kind of listening that makes people feel so understood, so genuinely heard, that they remember the conversation for years. That chapter could change every relationship in your life. Stay with us. Chapter 3. The Lost Art of Listening. How to make anyone feel truly heard. There is a skill so rare, so quietly powerful, so consistently underestimated that the people who genuinely possess it are considered almost magnetic by everyone around them. They do not dominate conversations. They do not dazzle people with stories or overwhelm rooms with personality. They are not necessarily the loudest voice at the table or the most decorated person in the room. But when you walk away from a conversation with one of them, you feel something specific. Something warm and full and strangely energizing. And if someone asked you to explain it, you would probably say something like, "They just really got me." That skill is listening. Real listening. Not the performance of listening. Not the nodding and the aram-ham, and the politely patient expression you wear while you are actually composing your next sentence in your head. The genuine, complete, fully present act of receiving another human being's words and responding to what is actually there. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Most of us are far worse at this than we think we are. A landmark study from Harvard Business Review found that most people only retain about 25% of what they hear in a given conversation. 25%. That means in the average interaction, 3/4 of what someone tells you is simply gone, filtered out, overwritten, or never truly processed in the first place. And most of us have no idea this is happening because we feel like we are listening. We are present in the room. We are looking at the person. We are technically receiving the sound waves. But receiving sound and truly listening are two completely different activities, operating at two completely different levels of the human brain. Dr. Ralph Nichols, widely regarded as the father of listening research in America, spent decades studying this gap. His conclusion was direct and somewhat humbling. The most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and to be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them. He also found that listening is the communication skill we use the most and the one we are trained in the least. We spend years in school learning to read and write. We take speech classes. We practice presentations. Nobody teaches us how to listen. Until now. Let's start by identifying the 3 most common listening traps, the habits that feel like listening but are quietly destroying your conversations every single day. The first trap is autobiographical listening. This is when someone is talking and instead of staying with their experience, your brain immediately starts searching your own memory bank for a matching story. They mention a difficult week at work and before they finish the sentence, you are already thinking about your difficult week at work and how you are going to tell it. They describe a trip they took to Costa Rica and your brain is already in Cancun, 2019, rehearsing the details. The result is that the moment they pause for breath, you redirect the conversation back to yourself, and they notice, maybe not consciously, but they feel the subtle shift from being listened to being used as a launching pad. The second trap is solution listening. This one is especially common among high achievers, problem solvers, and people who genuinely want to help, which, ironically, makes it one of the most well-intentioned ways to make someone feel completely unheard. Someone starts telling you about a problem they are dealing with, and your brain immediately jumps to fix-it mode. You are barely 3 sentences into their story before you are already assembling a list of suggestions, strategies, and action steps. The problem is that most people, especially in emotionally loaded conversations, do not want a solution first. They want to feel understood first. They want to know that someone actually sat inside their experience with them before handing them a ladder out of it. Researcher and author Brené Brown addresses this beautifully in her work on empathy. She draws a sharp distinction between empathy and sympathy, pointing out that empathy means feeling with people, climbing down into the difficult place they are in and saying, "I see you here, and you are not alone," while sympathy means looking down from the edge and offering a rope. Both are kind, but only one makes people feel truly heard. The third trap is reloading listening. This is perhaps the most universal of the 3, the habit of spending the time while someone else is talking not actually processing what they are saying, but mentally rehearsing what you are going to say the moment they stop. You are physically present, your eyes are on them, but cognitively you are somewhere else entirely, running through your response, editing it, making sure it sounds right. And because your brain cannot fully do 2 things at once, the actual content of what the other person is saying, the nuance, the emotion, the details that matter, largely washes over you. The result of all 3 of these traps is the same. The other person leaves the conversation feeling subtly unsatisfied, vaguely unseen, and unable to quite explain why. So what does real listening actually look like in practice? It starts with a conscious decision to make the other person's experience your only job for the duration of the conversation. Not split your attention. Not manage your own impressions simultaneously. Not prepare your response. Just receive. Fully, completely, with your whole mind directed at one purpose. Understanding what this person is actually communicating beneath the words they are choosing. The most powerful tool for this is what psychologists call active listening. And while that phrase gets thrown around a lot, the specific techniques that make it work are rarely explained with any precision. So let's be precise. The first technique is reflective listening. This means occasionally paraphrasing back what you have heard. Not repeating it word for word like a parrot, but restating the core of it in your own words, which demonstrates comprehension and invites correction if you got it wrong. Something as simple as, "So it sounds like the hardest part wasn't the workload itself, it was feeling like your effort wasn't being recognized. Is that right?" That one sentence does several things simultaneously. It proves you were listening. It deepens the person's sense of being understood. And it often helps them understand their own experience more clearly, because hearing it reflected back creates a kind of emotional clarity that just talking into the air does not. The second technique is leaning into emotion. Most people hear the factual content of what someone says and respond to that. Great listeners hear the emotional undercurrent and respond to that first. If someone tells you they just got passed over for a promotion they worked incredibly hard for, the facts are clear. But the emotion underneath might be exhaustion, humiliation, self-doubt, or quiet rage. Acknowledging that emotion, that sounds genuinely crushing, especially after everything you put into it, before offering any perspective or advice creates a moment of real human connection that the person will remember long after the conversation ends. The third technique is strategic silence. Most Americans are deeply uncomfortable with conversational silence, and that discomfort drives them to fill every pause immediately with a follow-up question, a reaction, a pivot to a new topic. But silence, used intentionally, is one of the most powerful tools in a listener's arsenal. When someone finishes saying something meaningful and you pause, genuinely pause, for 2 or 3 full seconds before responding, it communicates something profound. It says, "What you just said was worth sitting with." It says, "I am not rushing past your words to get to my own." That pause, that deliberate beat of silence, often prompts the other person to go deeper, to add the thing they were not sure they were going to say, to reveal the layer underneath the first layer. The most important part of many conversations lives in that second layer. And you only get there if you give the silence room to breathe. The fourth technique is eye contact calibration. Not staring, that is intense and uncomfortable for everyone. But maintaining warm, steady, natural eye contact for the majority of a conversation signals something your whole nervous system communicates independently of your words. You have my full attention. Research consistently shows that people who maintain appropriate eye contact during conversations are perceived as more intelligent, more trustworthy, and more emotionally present than those who do not. In a world of phones and screens and perpetual digital distraction, the simple act of looking at someone, truly looking at them, is becoming genuinely rare, which means it is becoming genuinely powerful. Here is your practical tool for this chapter, and it is a simple challenge. In your very next meaningful conversation, set yourself one rule. For the first 5 minutes, your only job is to understand. Not to respond, not to relate, not to help, not to impress. Just to understand. Ask one follow-up question. Reflect one thing back. Pause before you respond. And notice, really notice, how differently the other person behaves when they realize they are actually being heard. You will feel the shift. They will feel the shift. And you will begin to understand why the greatest gift you can give another human being costs you absolutely nothing, except your full, undivided attention. In Chapter 4, we are going to build directly on top of everything you just learned. Because once you know how to truly listen, you unlock the ability to ask the kinds of questions that make people open up completely. Questions so good, so well-timed, so precisely aimed at what actually matters, that people walk away from the conversation thinking you might be the most perceptive person they have ever met. Those questions are coming up next. Stay with us. Chapter 4. The Art of Asking. Questions that make people open up completely. There is a question that changed the trajectory of an entire company. In 2001, a relatively unknown executive at a struggling tech firm walked into a meeting with his senior leadership team and asked something nobody had asked before. Not, what are our numbers? Not, what is our competition doing? Not, how do we cut costs? He asked, what would have to be true for us to be the best in the world at this? That question, that single precisely constructed, genuinely curious question, reoriented the entire strategic conversation. It shifted the room from defensive thinking to expansive thinking. It opened doors that the previous questions had kept firmly shut. The company eventually became one of the most dominant in its industry, and the executive later credited that one question as the turning point. The question you ask determines the answer you get, and the answer you get determines the direction everything moves from that moment forward. This is true in boardrooms. It is true on first dates. It is true at family dinners and in therapy offices and in the quiet, pivotal conversations between friends that end up reshaping the course of someone's life. The quality of your questions is the single most reliable predictor of the quality of your conversations. And most people, through no fault of their own, have never been taught how to ask a truly great one. That changes right now. Let's start with the most important distinction in the entire art of asking: the difference between dead-end questions and open-door questions. A dead-end question is any question that can be answered in one word or one short phrase, and which, once answered, leaves the conversation exactly where it was, or worse, slightly further behind. Did you have a good weekend? Is a dead-end question. Are you enjoying the event? Is a dead-end question. Do you like your job? Is a dead-end question. These questions are not wrong or harmful. They are the social equivalent of a handshake, a way of signaling friendliness without actually going anywhere. But if your entire conversational toolkit is built around dead-end questions, you will spend most of your social interactions feeling like you are pushing a boulder uphill. An open-door question, by contrast, is one that requires a real answer. One that invites the other person to think, to reflect, to choose what they want to share and how much they want to reveal. What was the most memorable part of your weekend? Is an open-door question. What do you actually enjoy about what you do? Is an open-door question. What made you decide to come to this event? Is an open-door question. The difference is not subtle once you start paying attention to it. Open-door questions create momentum. They give the other person something to move toward, and they give you something real to work with once they do. The single most powerful structural upgrade you can make to your questions is to swap did and do and are for what and how and tell me about. That swap alone will transform the texture of your conversations almost immediately. Now let's go deeper, because open-door questions are just the beginning. The second level of great questioning is what we are going to call the iceberg technique. Here is the premise. Everything a person tells you in conversation is the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of experience, emotion, memory, and meaning sitting just below the surface. Most conversationalists stay on the surface. They respond to what was said, move to the next topic, respond to that, move on again. The result is a conversation that covers a lot of ground but never goes anywhere truly interesting. The iceberg technique is the deliberate practice of sending one question straight down, beneath the surface, beneath the first answer, beneath the polished version the person has told before, to find what is actually living underneath. Here is how it works in practice. Someone tells you they recently left a secure corporate job to start their own business. The surface response is, "Oh wow, that is exciting. What kind of business?" A fine question. An open-door question. Even. But it stays on the surface. The iceberg question goes underneath. What was the moment you realized you actually had to make that leap? Or, what was the hardest part about walking away from something stable? Or, is there a version of you from 5 years ago who would be completely shocked by that decision? Every single one of those questions is aimed at the same target. The real story, the emotional truth, the lived human experience that exists beneath the talking points. And when people feel a question aimed at that level, something almost physical happens. They pause. Their eyes change slightly. They take a breath. And then they tell you something real, something they probably do not tell most people, because most people never asked. That moment of genuine depth is what transforms a conversation from forgettable to unforgettable. The third principle of great questioning is the follow-up as validation. Research by Harvard Business School professor Alison Wood Brooks found something that seems obvious in retrospect but was quietly revolutionary when quantified. People who ask follow-up questions, questions that directly build on what the other person just said, are consistently rated as significantly more likable, more intelligent, and more engaging than people who do not. Not because follow-up questions are some kind of social trick, but because they communicate something the first question alone cannot. I was actually listening to your answer, and what you said mattered enough to me that I want to know more. Think about what that communicates to another human being. In a world where most people are half distracted, where conversations are routinely interrupted by phones and notifications and wandering attention, someone who not only hears your answer but cares enough to go deeper is someone you want to keep talking to. That is the quiet power of the follow-up question. It is not a technique. It is proof of presence. Now, there are two specific types of questions that deserve their own mention because of how reliably and dramatically they change the quality of a conversation. The first is the values question. A values question is any question that invites someone to share what they actually believe, prioritize, or care about, as opposed to simply what they have done or where they have been. What is something most people would be surprised to learn you care deeply about? Is a values question. If you could only get really good at one more thing in your life, what would it be? Is a values question. What is something you used to believe strongly that you have completely changed your mind about? Is a values question. These questions are not appropriate for every conversation or every stage of connection. You would not lead with one at a business networking event. But when the moment is right, a well-placed values question can take a conversation from pleasant to genuinely transformative in about 30 seconds. The second is the hypothetical question. Hypotheticals are magic, especially with Americans, who are culturally wired to imagine, to dream, to think in terms of possibility and potential. If you could live anywhere in the world for 1 year with no logistical constraints, where would it be and why? Lights people up in a way that factual questions almost never do. If you had to start your career completely over with everything you know now, what would you do differently? Invites reflection and self-disclosure simultaneously. Hypotheticals bypass the rehearsed answers people have for their real lives and access something fresher, more spontaneous, and far more revealing. There is one more thing that needs to be said about the art of asking, and it is possibly the most important thing in this entire chapter. The best question in the world, delivered with the wrong energy, lands flat every time. Curiosity without warmth feels like an interrogation. Interest without ease feels like an interview. The questions we have talked about in this chapter are powerful not because of their structure but because of the intention behind them. Genuine, non-judgmental, warmly human curiosity about who the person in front of you actually is. Tony Robbins, who has spent decades studying what creates real human connection, puts it simply: the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships, and the quality of your relationships is the quality of your communication. And at the center of quality communication is not how well you speak. It is how well you make the other person feel genuinely curious about. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. Before your next meaningful conversation, write down 3 open-door questions you could genuinely ask that person. Questions aimed not at the surface of their life, but at the iceberg underneath. Pick 1 values question and 1 hypothetical from the list. Then, during the actual conversation, practice asking at least 1 follow-up question per answer they give. Not a prepared one, but a live, in-the-moment response to what they actually said. Notice how differently the conversation moves. Notice how much more the other person talks, how much more animated they become, how much warmer the whole interaction feels. And notice how much less you are worried about running out of things to say, because great questions do not just open doors, they reveal entire hallways. In Chapter 5, we are going to take your conversational power to a completely different level, because knowing how to listen and how to ask will make you an extraordinary conversation partner, but knowing how to tell a great story will make you genuinely unforgettable. The people who command rooms, who hold audiences, who get remembered long after they leave, they all share one specific skill. And in the next chapter, it belongs to you. Stay with us. Chapter 5. The Storyteller's Edge. How to tell stories that hold any room. In 1984, a relatively unknown advertising copywriter sat down to write a campaign for a small computer company that most Americans had never heard of. He did not write about processor speeds. He did not list technical specifications. He did not compare features or quote industry analysts or use a single piece of data in the entire ad. Instead, he told a story. A 60-second visual story about conformity, rebellion, and the quiet revolutionary power of thinking differently. The ad ran exactly once, during the third quarter of Super Bowl XVIII, in front of approximately 77 million people. You almost certainly know it. The 1984 Apple Macintosh commercial is still studied in marketing classrooms across America more than 4 decades later. Not because of the product it advertised, but because of the story it told. A story so precisely constructed, so emotionally resonant, so perfectly aimed at what American audiences in that moment most deeply wanted to feel, that it changed the trajectory of an entire company and rewrote the rules of advertising forever. That is what a great story can do. Not just in a Super Bowl ad. Not just on a stage or in a boardroom. In a conversation, your conversation, the next one you have, the one happening at dinner tonight or at a work meeting tomorrow morning or on a first date next weekend. Because the fundamental human response to a well-told story does not change based on the setting. Neuroscientist Yuri Hassan at Princeton University discovered through brain imaging research that when someone tells a compelling story, the brain of the listener actually begins to synchronize with the brain of the storyteller. Not metaphorically, literally. The same neural regions fire in both brains simultaneously. What the storyteller feels, the listener begins to feel. What the storyteller sees in their mind, the listener's brain starts to construct. This phenomenon has a name: neural coupling. And it is the neurological explanation for something you have felt your entire life without being able to explain. The way a great story pulls you in so completely that you forget where you are, forget your phone exists, forget that you were tired 3 minutes ago. The people who know how to create that experience in conversation are the ones who get remembered. They are the ones who get the job offer, the second date, the promotion, the loyal friendships that last decades. And the extraordinary truth, the truth this chapter is built around, is that great storytelling is not a gift. It is a structure. And once you know the structure, you can build it every single time. Let's start with the foundation. Every compelling story that has ever been told, from the campfire tales of ancient civilizations to the Netflix series you stayed up too late watching last Tuesday, is built on the same 3-part skeleton: situation, struggle, and resolution. Some people call it setup, conflict, and payoff. Some call it the beginning, middle, and end. But whatever you call it, the architecture is non-negotiable, because it mirrors the way the human brain is literally wired to process experience. The situation is your setup, the world before the disruption. Who are the people involved, where are we, and what was normal before things changed? Keep this brief. The most common storytelling mistake Americans make in casual conversation is spending too long in the setup, adding context that does not serve the story, establishing details that do not pay off later. The setup exists for one purpose only: to make the listener care about what happens next. Give them just enough to be invested, then move immediately to the second element. The struggle is the engine of the entire story. It is the thing that went wrong, the obstacle that appeared, the decision that had to be made under pressure, the moment everything got harder than expected. This is where your listener leans in. This is where neural coupling kicks in. Human brains are biologically wired to engage with conflict, not because we enjoy other people's suffering, but because conflict is information. It signals. Pay attention, something important is happening here. The more specifically and vividly you describe the struggle, the more completely your listener enters the story. Vague struggle creates mild interest. Specific, detailed, emotionally honest struggle creates genuine tension. And tension is the engine of engagement. The resolution is where the meaning lives. And here is something most casual storytellers get wrong. The resolution does not have to be triumphant. It does not have to be happy, or successful, or neatly wrapped. What it has to be is true, emotionally true, honestly felt, clearly connected back to the struggle that preceded it. Some of the most powerful stories end in failure, confusion, or unresolved questions. Because real life often does. and audiences respond to authenticity far more reliably than they respond to manufactured happy endings. Now, structure alone does not make a story great. Structure makes it functional. What makes it memorable are 3 specific techniques layered on top. The first technique is sensory specificity. The difference between a forgettable story and an unforgettable one almost always comes down to detail. Not quantity of detail, but quality of detail. Specific, sensory, surprising details that place the listener inside the moment rather than observing it from outside. Do not say, "We were at a restaurant." Say, "We were at this tiny Italian place in downtown Chicago where the tables were so close together you could hear the couple next to you arguing about the check." The second version puts your listener in the room. Their brain constructs the image. They are now there, and now they are yours. The second technique is the pause before the payoff. This is one of the most underused tools in conversational storytelling, and it is almost comically simple. Right before you deliver the punchline, the twist, the revelation, the emotional peak of the story, pause. Not for dramatic effect in a theatrical sense. Just stop talking for 1 full second. Let the silence do its work. That pause creates micro-tension, a tiny suspenseful gap that the listener's brain rushes to fill, which means when the payoff arrives, they are already leaning toward it. The comedian Jerry Seinfeld, one of the most studied timing technicians in American entertainment, has said that the pause before the punchline is often more important than the punchline itself. The same principle applies at your dinner table. The third technique is the universal hook. A universal hook is a single sentence, placed either at the beginning or the end of your story, that connects the specific experience you are describing to a broader human truth. Something your listener can immediately recognize in their own life. Have you ever worked incredibly hard on something and had someone else take the credit? Is a universal hook. You know that feeling when you are completely sure you are right and then you realize you were absolutely wrong the entire time? Is a universal hook. These sentences are bridges. They carry the listener from your specific experience into their own emotional memory, which is where genuine connection is born. Oprah Winfrey, whose entire career has been built on the power of story and connection, once said, "The biggest adventure you can take is to live the life of your dreams." But it is her lesser-quoted insight that applies most directly here. Her consistent observation that every single person, regardless of background or circumstance, wants to feel that their experience is shared. That they are not alone in what they have felt. The universal hook is how you give them that feeling in 30 seconds. There is one more element worth addressing directly, because it trips up a lot of genuinely intelligent people. The fear that your stories are not interesting enough. Here is the reality. You do not need extraordinary experiences to tell extraordinary stories. You need extraordinary attention to the experiences you already have. The most compelling conversational storytellers in America are not the ones who have lived the most dramatic lives. They are the ones who pay close enough attention to ordinary moments to find what is surprising, specific, and emotionally true inside them. A story about getting stuck in traffic can be gripping if it is told with the right detail and the right emotional honesty. A story about a childhood dinner table can be unforgettable if it captures something true about family or aspiration, or the particular sadness of growing up. Your life is full of stories. They are not hiding from you. You are just not looking at them yet with a storyteller's eyes. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. Tonight or tomorrow morning, write down 3 stories from your own life. One funny, one challenging, one that changed how you see something. For each one, identify the situation, the struggle, and the resolution. Then find one sensory detail for each story. One specific image, sound, or feeling that places the listener in the moment. Practice telling one of those stories out loud, alone, before you tell it to another person. Time yourself. Aim for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. The constraint of time will force you to find the essential bones of the story and strip everything else away. The next time a conversation opens a door for a story, and they will constantly, once you start looking, walk through it with confidence. Because you now know what structure holds it up, what details bring it alive, and what universal truth will make the person across from you feel, for one honest moment, completely understood. In Chapter 6, we are heading into territory that most people actively avoid: the difficult conversations. The awkward silences, the sensitive topics, the moments of disagreement and tension that can either destroy a connection or, if handled with skill and grace, make it stronger than it was before. That chapter is going to be one of the most useful things you have ever heard. Stay with us. Chapter 6. Navigating the hard stuff, awkward silences, difficult topics, and the art of disagreeing without destroying. There is a conversation most people are avoiding right now. Not a hypothetical conversation. An actual specific real-life conversation that has been sitting on the back shelf of someone's mind for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer, quietly collecting weight every single time they think about it and decide today is not the right day. Maybe it is a friendship that has gone cold and nobody has addressed it. Maybe it is a workplace tension that everyone in the office can feel but nobody will name. Maybe it is a family disagreement that resurfaces every Thanksgiving like a recurring bad dream, and every year the family collectively agrees, without ever saying so, to just leave it alone for one more year. The avoiding feels like safety. It is not. Every unaddressed tension in a relationship is a slow leak. You may not notice it draining anything on a Tuesday afternoon in March. But over months, over years, it quietly empties something that is very difficult to refill. The sense that the relationship is honest, that the connection is real, that the people involved actually trust each other enough to tell the truth. And when that sense is gone, what you have left is not really a relationship at all. It is a performance of one. This chapter is about stopping the leak. We are going to cover 3 specific categories of conversational difficulty that most people handle poorly. Not because they are unkind or unintelligent, but because nobody ever gave them a framework. We are going to talk about awkward silences, about sensitive and emotionally charged topics, and about the single most important skill in navigating disagreement without burning down the relationship in the process. Let's start with the silence, because it is the least dangerous of the 3 and the most universally feared. The awkward silence has a specific psychological signature. It arrives, it expands, and in approximately 2 seconds it begins generating a level of social discomfort wildly disproportionate to what is actually happening. Nothing bad has occurred. Nobody has been hurt. 2 people are simply occupying the same space without words, which is something human beings do constantly and naturally when they are alone, but which becomes unbearable the moment another person is present. Why? Because silence between people carries meaning. It is not neutral. And in the absence of words to clarify what that meaning is, the brain rushes to assign the worst possible interpretation. Boredom, rejection, disapproval, the conclusion that the conversation has failed and the relationship along with it. The remedy is both simpler and more profound than most people expect. The remedy is to change your relationship with silence itself. To stop treating it as evidence of failure and start treating it as a natural, human, completely acceptable beat in the rhythm of a real conversation. Practically, this means 2 things. First, when silence arrives, resist the urge to fill it immediately with whatever word comes first. That panic-driven filler, the random topic change, the comment about the weather, the awkward laugh followed by nothing, often makes the silence feel worse, not better, because it signals to both people that something uncomfortable just happened. Instead, take a breath. Let the silence exist for 1 or 2 full seconds. Then, when you do speak, speak from genuine curiosity rather than desperation. Circle back to something said earlier using the callback technique from Chapter 2. Ask a follow-up question rooted in what was just discussed. The transition will feel natural because it is natural. It is coming from real engagement rather than social panic. Second, and more importantly, practice becoming comfortable with brief silence in low-stakes situations so that when it arrives in high-stakes ones, your nervous system already knows it is survivable. The more you sit with silence without catastrophizing, the less power it has over you. And the less power it has over you, the less your conversation partner feels it too. Because anxiety, like confidence, is contagious. Now let's move into more significant territory. Sensitive topics. America in the current moment is, to put it gently, a place where many topics carry a very large amount of charge. Politics, race, religion, money, family structures, health choices. The list of subjects that can go from pleasant to combustible in a single sentence is longer now than it has been in a long time, and most people respond to that reality by either avoiding all of it entirely or wading in without any real strategy and hoping for the best. Neither approach serves you or the people you care about. The framework that actually works is built on 3 principles. The first principle is separate the person from the position. When someone holds a view you find genuinely difficult to understand or accept, the most natural human response is to unconsciously start treating the view and the person as the same thing, which means any challenge to the view feels, to them, like a challenge to their identity. When that happens, the conversation stops being about ideas and starts being about survival. Nobody changes their mind when they feel attacked. Nobody opens up when they feel defensive. But when you approach their position with visible curiosity, when your body language, your tone, and your actual words all communicate, "I am trying to understand how you got here, not trying to dismantle you," the entire dynamic shifts. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt, whose research on moral psychology has fundamentally changed how social scientists think about political disagreement, found that people almost never change their minds because of logical argument alone. They change their minds when they feel genuinely heard and respected by someone who then offers a different perspective. The sequence matters enormously. Understanding first, perspective second, never the other way around. The second principle is name what is happening without weaponizing it. If a conversation starts to heat up, the instinct for most people is either to push harder or to shut down completely. Both responses escalate the disconnection. A third option, one that requires real courage and real skill, is to simply name the dynamic out loud. "I feel like we might be talking past each other a little bit. Can we slow down for a second?" Or, "I notice this is getting tense and I do not want it to, because I actually care about what you think." These sentences do something remarkable. They interrupt the escalation pattern by introducing meta-communication, communication about the communication, which requires both people to step back from the content and look at the process. And in that step back, space opens up. The third principle is know your purpose before you open your mouth. Before entering any sensitive conversational territory, ask yourself honestly, what is my actual goal here? Because if your goal is to win, you have already lost. Not the argument, but the relationship. If your goal is to be right, you will be right and alone. But if your goal is genuine understanding, if you enter the conversation actually curious about the other person's experience, actually open to having your own thinking challenged, then no matter where the conversation ends up, you have succeeded at the only thing that actually matters in human connection. Which brings us to disagreement, the final and most important category in this chapter. Here is the central truth about disagreement that most Americans were never taught. Conflict, handled well, deepens trust. Not destroys it, deepens it. Because when two people can disagree openly, can hold opposing views, can push back on each other, can say, "I see it differently and here is why," and both walk away feeling respected and valued, those two people now know something about each other that smooth, agreeable conversation could never reveal. They know the relationship is strong enough to hold the truth. The technique that makes this possible is called the steelman, the deliberate practice of articulating the strongest possible version of the other person's argument before offering your own. Not the weakest version, not the version easiest to dismiss, but the most intelligent, most reasonable, most genuinely compelling version of what they believe. This does two things simultaneously. It demonstrates to the other person that you have actually engaged with their thinking rather than reflexively rejected it, which immediately lowers their defenses. And it forces you to genuinely grapple with their perspective, which not infrequently reveals something you had not fully considered before. Abraham Lincoln, widely regarded as one of the greatest communicators in American presidential history, was famous for this practice. Before responding to any significant opposition, he would articulate the opposing argument more clearly and charitably than the people making it, and then, from that position of demonstrated fairness, make his own case. It was disarming. It was persuasive. And it was deeply, genuinely respectful. Which is why even people who disagreed with Lincoln often left conversations with him feeling respected rather than diminished. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. Think of one conversation you have been avoiding. One that has been sitting on that back shelf, collecting weight. Identify which of the three categories it falls into: sensitivity, disagreement, or unaddressed tension. Then, before you have that conversation, write down the strongest possible version of the other person's perspective. Not to surrender your own, but to walk in having already given them the most important thing any difficult conversation needs to survive: the knowledge that you genuinely tried to understand. The hard conversations are not the enemy of good relationships. They are the price of real ones. In Chapter 7, we are shifting from the difficult to the high stakes, the specific conversations that carry enormous real-world consequences. Job interviews, first dates, introductions to people who intimidate you, the moments where the pressure is highest and the margin for error feels smallest. We are going to give you a precise, field-tested game plan for every single one. You are going to walk into those moments differently after this. Stay with us. Chapter 7. High-stakes conversations. How to show up when it matters most. There is a specific kind of pressure that arrives before certain conversations, and it feels completely different from ordinary social nervousness. It is heavier. It is more focused. It sits somewhere between your chest and your stomach, and it does not move regardless of how many times you tell yourself to relax. It shows up the morning of a job interview when you are rehearsing answers in the shower. It shows up in the parking lot before a first date when you are checking your reflection one more time for no real reason. It shows up in the elevator on the way to meet someone whose opinion of you genuinely matters. A powerful mentor, a potential investor, a person whose respect you have wanted for a long time. This pressure has a name in psychology. It is called evaluative threat, the specific anxiety triggered not by danger in the physical sense, but by the perception that you are about to be assessed, measured, and judged by someone whose verdict carries real consequences for your life. And here is what makes evaluative threat so particularly disruptive to conversation. It hijacks the exact cognitive resources you need most. It narrows your attention, floods your working memory with worst-case scenarios, and pulls your focus inward at precisely the moment you most need it pointed outward, toward the other person, toward genuine connection, toward the kind of presence that makes people want to say yes to you. The goal of this chapter is not to eliminate that pressure. Trying to eliminate nerves before a high-stakes conversation is like trying to eliminate adrenaline before a sprint. It is not only impossible, it is counterproductive, because managed well, that activation energy is exactly what sharpens your performance. The goal is to channel it, to walk into the room with a framework so clear and so practiced that even when the pressure is high, you know exactly what you are doing and why. We are going to cover 3 specific high-stakes scenarios: the job interview, the first date, and the cold introduction to someone who intimidates you. Each one has its own dynamics, its own common failure points, and its own precise strategy for success. Let's start with the job interview. The single biggest mistake most Americans make in a job interview is treating it as an interrogation rather than a conversation. They sit across from the interviewer in a posture of pure reception, waiting for questions, answering them as accurately as possible, and then waiting for the next one, as if the entire purpose of the interaction is to provide correct answers to a standardized test. This approach, even when executed perfectly, produces interviews that are technically adequate and humanly forgettable. The interviewers who hire, the ones who have conducted hundreds of these conversations and know within the first 10 minutes whether they are looking at a candidate or a colleague, are not primarily evaluating your answers. They are evaluating your energy, your curiosity, your presence, and whether they can imagine spending 40 hours a week in the same building as you. Your resume already told them what you have done. The interview is where they find out who you are. Which means the most powerful thing you can do in any job interview is arrive with genuine, well-researched questions of your own, and ask them not just at the designated, "Do you have any questions for us?" moment at the end, but woven naturally into the conversation throughout. When an interviewer describes the team culture and you respond with, "That is interesting," What does that look like on a Tuesday afternoon when a project is behind schedule? You have just done 3 things simultaneously. You have demonstrated real listening, you have shown critical thinking, and you have transformed the dynamic from interrogation to dialogue, which is where hiring decisions are actually made. The second strategy for job interviews comes directly from research by organizational psychologist Adam Grant, who has studied what separates genuinely compelling candidates from technically qualified ones. His finding is consistent. The candidates who get hired are disproportionately the ones who express authentic enthusiasm, not performed enthusiasm, not the rehearsed, "I am so passionate about this opportunity" variety, but the kind rooted in specific, detailed knowledge of the company and a genuine articulation of why this particular role at this particular organization connects to something they actually care about. Specificity signals sincerity. And sincerity, in a world full of rehearsed interview scripts, is genuinely rare and immediately recognizable. Now let's talk about the first date. First dates fail for one reason more consistently than any other. Both people are performing instead of connecting. They arrive with a carefully constructed version of themselves, the highlight reel, the polished narrative, the answers that position them most favorably, and they spend the entire dinner presenting that version while quietly evaluating whether the other person's version is compatible with theirs. The result is 2 humans sitting 3 feet apart, separated by an invisible wall of mutual self-protection, both wondering why the conversation feels flat despite the fact that they are both reasonably interesting people. The antidote is disarmingly simple. Go first. Going first means being the first person at the table to say something real, something beyond the resume version of your life, something that acknowledges genuine uncertainty or genuine enthusiasm or genuine quirk. Not oversharing, not performing vulnerability for effect, but offering one honest, specific, slightly unguarded thing about yourself that gives the other person permission to do the same. Brené Brown's decades of research on vulnerability and human connection arrive at one finding that is directly applicable here. Connection is the result of authenticity, not performance. The moment one person at a table drops the performance, even slightly, even briefly, the entire dynamic shifts. The other person exhales. The guard comes down a few inches. And suddenly you are not 2 people auditioning for each other anymore. You are 2 people actually meeting. The other critical first date strategy is to ask one genuinely surprising question. Something outside the standard first date script of job, neighborhood, and weekend plans. Something like, what is something you are genuinely excited about right now that most people in your life are not interested in? Or, what is the best decision you have made in the last 2 years? These questions do not just generate interesting answers. They signal immediately that this is a different kind of conversation, which makes you a different kind of person. And different, in the context of dating, is extraordinarily attractive. Now let's tackle the third scenario, the cold introduction to someone who intimidates you. This happens to virtually every ambitious American at some point. The industry leader at the conference. The executive in the elevator. The accomplished, impressive, clearly important person at the event who you would genuinely benefit from knowing, and who you have approximately 90 seconds to make a real impression on before the moment disappears entirely. Most people either avoid the introduction completely, or they approach it with a kind of nervous deference that immediately positions them as a supplicant rather than an equal. They say things like, "I know you are incredibly busy," or "I do not want to take up too much of your time," which are well-intentioned phrases that inadvertently communicate a lack of confidence and a lack of value before the conversation has even begun. The framework that actually works is built on 3 seconds and 1 sentence. The 3 seconds are for a specific mental reset before you approach. In those 3 seconds, you remind yourself of one thing. This person is just a person. They have insecurities. They get nervous. They have had bad days and good days and moments of self-doubt that would surprise you. The accomplishments are real, the status is real, but the fundamental human standing across from you is exactly as human as you are. That reset does not make you arrogant. It makes you present. And presence, as we have said throughout this audiobook, is the rarest and most magnetic quality you can bring into any interaction. The 1 sentence is your opening, and it needs to do two things. Demonstrate that you know something specific about their work and express genuine rather than flattering interest in it. Not, "I am such a big fan of everything you do." That is a statement that requires nothing from them and says nothing about you. Instead, "I read your piece on distributed leadership last month and it changed how I think about a problem I have been working on. I would love to ask you one question about it if you have 30 seconds. That sentence is specific, it is confident, it demonstrates value, and it asks for something small enough that the answer is almost always yes. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. Pick one upcoming high-stakes conversation in your life. An interview, a date, an important introduction, and do 3 things before it happens. First, write down 2 genuinely curious questions you want to ask the other person, rooted in real knowledge of who they are. Second, identify one honest, slightly unguarded thing about yourself you are willing to share that moves the conversation past the surface. Third, do the 3-second reset the moment before you walk in, and remind yourself that on the other side of that door is just another human being, hoping the conversation goes well too. Because here is the thing about high-stakes conversations that most people never realize until it is too late. The other person is almost always just as invested in a good outcome as you are. The interviewer wants to fill the role with someone great. The date wants to have a real connection. The intimidating executive wants to meet someone interesting. They are rooting for you before you even open your mouth. Walk in like you already know that. In Chapter 8, we are going into the conversation that happens underneath the conversation. The world of body language, micro-expressions, and the unspoken signals that reveal more about a person in 30 seconds than their words reveal in 30 minutes. Once you learn to read that world, you will never experience a conversation the same way again. Stay with us. Chapter 8. The Silent Conversation. How to read body language and speak without saying a word. There is a conversation happening right now that most people are completely unaware of. It is happening in every meeting room, every restaurant, every first date, every family dinner, every job interview, every casual exchange between 2 people standing in line at a coffee shop. It is running simultaneously alongside the spoken conversation. Beneath the words, beneath the sentences, beneath the carefully chosen language people use to present themselves to the world. And it is revealing things about every single person involved that their words are actively trying to conceal. This is the silent conversation. The conversation of the body. And the research on how much it shapes human perception is, once you encounter it, genuinely difficult to ignore. Albert Mehrabian, the UCLA psychologist whose work on nonverbal communication became one of the most cited and most misunderstood findings in the history of social science, proposed that in emotionally loaded conversations, only 7% of meaning is communicated through words alone. 38% comes from tone of voice. 55% comes from body language. Now, those specific numbers have been debated and contextualized extensively over the decades since his original research, and it would be an oversimplification to apply them rigidly to every conversation. But the core insight holds up across virtually every subsequent study in the field. What your body is doing while you speak matters enormously, often more than the words you choose. Think about a time someone told you they were fine and you knew, with complete certainty, without being able to explain exactly how, that they were absolutely not fine. Or a time someone said they were excited about a plan while everything in their posture and their eyes communicated something closer to dread. Your brain read something. Not the words. The body. And it was right. That same reading ability is available to you in every conversation you have. Not as a manipulation tool, not as a way to catch people in deceptions, but as a profound source of empathy and understanding that makes you a dramatically better communicator. Because when you can read what someone is actually feeling beneath what they are saying, you can respond to the whole person, not just the surface version they are presenting. Let's start with the fundamentals. The single most important thing to understand about body language is that you must always read it in clusters and context, never in isolation. The classic mistake made by people who have read one article about nonverbal communication is to assign fixed meaning to individual signals. Crossed arms mean defensive. Looking away means lying. Touching your face means deception. These associations are not entirely without basis, but applied rigidly and in isolation, they lead to wildly inaccurate readings that can damage rather than deepen your understanding of people. Crossed arms might mean defensive, or it might mean the person is cold, physically uncomfortable, or simply has a habitual resting posture that has nothing to do with their emotional state. Looking away during a conversation might signal discomfort, or it might be how a particular person's brain processes complex thoughts, looking inward rather than at you while they formulate a genuine and honest answer. Read signals in clusters. 3 or more non-verbal cues pointing in the same direction simultaneously. And always read them against the baseline, the person's normal, relaxed, comfortable behavior. Deviation from baseline is where the real information lives. Not the crossed arms in isolation, but the crossed arms that appeared specifically when a certain topic came up, combined with a subtle shift in posture and a slight flattening of vocal tone. That cluster, against that baseline, tells you something real. Now let's go through the specific signals that matter most in everyday American conversation. Postural openness and closedness is your most reliable macro-level indicator of engagement and comfort. An open posture, body facing toward you, shoulders relaxed, arms uncrossed, weight settled rather than perched on the edge of the seat, signals comfort, genuine interest, and psychological safety. A closed posture, body angled slightly away, arms crossed or pulled close, weight shifted back, signals some degree of discomfort, whether with the topic, the environment, or the interaction itself. When you notice a conversation partner shifting from open to closed, that is information. You do not need to call it out, but you might soften your approach, change the topic, or simply slow down and create more space for the other person to feel safe. Mirroring is one of the most fascinating phenomena in all of human social behavior, and one of the most powerful signals of genuine connection. When two people are truly engaged with each other, their bodies unconsciously begin to synchronize. They lean at the same angle. They shift positions in sequence. They lift their drinks at similar moments. They match each other's energy, pace, and physical orientation without either person planning or noticing it. This mirroring is driven by the brain's mirror neuron system, the same neural architecture behind empathy and emotional contagion, and it happens automatically when real rapport is present. Which means two things. First, when you notice mirroring happening in a conversation, it is a reliable signal that genuine connection has been established. Not just polite surface engagement, but actual resonance. Second, you can gently and subtly initiate mirroring intentionally by gradually matching the other person's posture and pace. Not mimicking them in a way that is obvious or strange, but moving toward alignment. Research by behavioral scientist Nick Morgan shows that when one person begins mirroring another, the mirrored person experiences a measurable increase in feelings of comfort, trust, and rapport within minutes. The body leads. The emotion follows. Eye contact deserves more depth than the brief mention it received in Chapter 3, because its nuances in a high-stakes conversation are significant. The optimal range for comfortable eye contact in American culture sits somewhere between 60 and 70% of the conversation. Enough to signal presence and engagement, not so much that it tips into intensity and discomfort. The specific moments when eye contact matters most are when you are making a key point, when you are asking a meaningful question, and when the other person is sharing something emotionally significant. Breaking eye contact at those moments, checking your phone, glancing around the room, looking at your hands, communicates inattention at precisely the moment attention matters most. Vocal tone and pace are technically not body language in the strictest sense, but they belong in this chapter because they operate below the level of word choice and carry an enormous amount of emotional information. Research from the University of Michigan found that telemarketers could be predicted to succeed or fail based entirely on vocal analysis, before a single word of their pitch was transcribed. The way you say something, the warmth in your tone, the confidence in your pace, the energy in your register, reaches your listener's emotional brain faster than the words themselves. Specifically, slowing your pace communicates confidence and gravity. Speeding up communicates excitement or nervousness, and the listener's brain distinguishes between the two primarily through the presence or absence of controlled breathing. Dropping your vocal register slightly, speaking from the chest rather than the throat, communicates authority and calm. And varying your pace and register throughout a conversation, rather than maintaining a monotone delivery, is one of the single most effective ways to hold attention over the long term. The human brain is wired to track change. It disengages from sameness automatically. Give it variation and it stays with you. Micro-expressions are the briefest and most revealing signals in the entire non-verbal vocabulary. Involuntary facial expressions that flash across a person's face in as little as 1/25th of a second before the conscious mind has time to suppress them. Pioneered in research by psychologist Paul Ekman, micro-expressions have been documented across cultures and are remarkably consistent in what they reveal. The 7 universal emotions of happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, contempt, and surprise. You do not need specialized training to begin noticing them in casual conversation. You simply need to practice paying attention to the face at the level of the eyes and the mouth simultaneously, rather than maintaining the polite, slightly unfocused gaze most people use in social interaction. Here is your practical tool for this chapter, and it is a simple 2-week exercise. For the next 14 days, choose one conversation per day, a meeting, a phone call, a dinner, and spend the first 5 minutes of it focused entirely on nonverbal information. Notice posture. Notice eye contact patterns. Notice when the other person mirrors you or stops mirroring you. Notice shifts in vocal tone. Notice what changes when certain topics come up versus others. Do not analyze out loud. Do not share your observations. Just watch and listen beneath the words, and let the silent conversation reveal itself to you. By the end of those 2 weeks, you will have developed a sensitivity to nonverbal communication that most people never build in an entire lifetime of conversations, because most people are too busy composing their next sentence to notice what is right in front of them. And once you can read the silent conversation, you can respond to the whole person. Not just the words, not just the story, the full, complete, beautifully complicated human being sitting across from you. In Chapter 9, we are taking everything you have built, the listening, the questioning, the storytelling, the emotional intelligence, the ability to navigate difficulty and read the room, and layering on top of it something that ties it all together. We are talking about genuine charisma, not the loud, performed, Hollywood version, the real kind, the kind that makes people feel better for having been in your presence. The kind that is not a personality type but a set of learnable, repeatable behaviors. That chapter is going to change how you walk into every room for the rest of your life. Stay with us. Chapter 9. The Charisma Code. How to make people feel better just for knowing you. There is a person in your life, you already know exactly who it is, who seems to make every room slightly better just by being in it. They do not necessarily talk the most. They are not always the funniest, the most accomplished, or the most conventionally impressive person present. But there is something about being around them that feels genuinely good, energizing in a way that is hard to articulate but impossible to miss. Conversations with them leave you feeling more capable, more interesting, more alive than you did before. You walk away thinking about something they said for days. You look forward to seeing them in a way that goes beyond simple social obligation. That person possesses what most people loosely call charisma, and for most of human history, charisma was treated as a mystery. Either you had it or you did not. Either the universe handed you that particular gift at birth or it handed you something else and you simply had to make peace with that. That understanding is wrong. And the research that proves it wrong is some of the most exciting and immediately applicable work in the entire field of social psychology. Olivia Fox Caban, whose landmark book on the science of charisma drew on research from MIT, Harvard, and Stanford, landed on a finding that fundamentally reframes the entire concept. Charisma is not a personality trait. It is a collection of behaviors. Specific, learnable, repeatable behaviors that can be studied, practiced, and developed by any person regardless of their natural temperament, introversion level, or starting point. The magnetic person you pictured at the beginning of this chapter did not receive charisma as a birthright. They developed, consciously or unconsciously, a specific set of habits that consistently produce a specific emotional response in the people around them. Those habits are what this chapter is about. Caban's research identifies 3 core components that together constitute genuine charisma: presence, power, and warmth. Not any one of the 3 in isolation. All 3, working together, calibrated to the context. Let's break each one down with the precision it deserves. Presence is the foundation, and it is the component most directly connected to everything we have built in this audiobook. At its most essential, presence means that when you are with someone, you are actually with them. Not partly with them while the other half of your attention is on your phone, your next meeting, your mental to-do list, or the conversation happening across the room. Fully, completely, entirely with them to the degree that they can feel it. This sounds simple. It is genuinely rare. In the age of smartphones and perpetual notification, the average American's attention span has been so thoroughly fragmented that the experience of being with someone who is truly present, who is not glancing at their screen, who is not scanning the room, who is looking at you with the kind of attention that says you are the only thing happening right now, is startling. Not in a bad way. In the way that makes people lean forward without knowing why. In the way that makes them remember you. The practical mechanism for presence is a technique called the immersion reset. Before any important social interaction, take 30 seconds to deliberately discharge whatever mental weight you are carrying into the conversation from elsewhere. The work stress, the traffic frustration, the anxiety about something unrelated. Not by suppressing it, but by briefly acknowledging it and then consciously setting it aside. You can return to it later. Right now, for the next hour, this conversation is the only thing. That reset is not spiritual practice. It is a cognitive choice. And it changes the quality of your attention in a way that other people register immediately, even without being able to explain what they are noticing. Power is the second component, and it is the one most commonly misunderstood. In the context of charisma, power does not mean dominance, authority, or the ability to make other people do things. It means the quality of someone who is comfortable in their own skin, who does not need external validation to feel settled, who does not shrink under social pressure, who occupies their own presence with quiet ease. It is the difference between someone who enters a room seeking approval and someone who enters a room simply ready to connect. Psychologist Amy Cuddy's research at Harvard Business School on what she calls presence, the internal state from which powerful behavior flows, found something remarkable about the relationship between the body and the mind. Her studies showed that adopting expansive, open physical postures for as little as 2 minutes before a high-stakes social interaction measurably changed participants' hormonal profiles, increasing testosterone and decreasing cortisol, which translated directly into more confident, more relaxed, more authentically powerful behavior in the subsequent interaction. The body, used deliberately, can generate the internal state that presence requires. But beyond the physiology, power in conversation shows up in a specific set of behavioral choices. It shows up in the willingness to hold a position under gentle social pressure rather than immediately collapsing into agreement. It shows up in the comfort with silence, not filling every pause with words, not rushing to smooth over every rough edge. It shows up in the quality of your eye contact, the pace of your speech, the way you occupy your physical space without apologizing for it. None of these behaviors are aggressive. All of them communicate something the human brain is exquisitely calibrated to detect. This person knows who they are. Warmth is the third component, and in many ways, it is the most important of the 3, because warmth without power reads as neediness, and power without warmth reads as intimidation. Together, they create something the world is genuinely hungry for. A person who is both strong and kind, both confident and caring, both grounded in themselves and genuinely invested in you. Warmth is communicated primarily through one channel: the quality of your attention. Not through compliments, though genuine compliments matter. Not through physical touch, though appropriate warmth in that dimension has its place. But through the specific, unmistakable signal that you are paying attention to this person. Not the category of person they represent, not the role they play in your network, not the version of them you knew 6 months ago, but the actual, present, living human being in front of you right now. The most practical expression of warmth in conversation is what researchers call high-quality listening behaviors, the specific microsignals that communicate full attention. nodding slowly and deliberately, not rapidly and reflexively, using the person's name naturally, not repeatedly in the hollow way of a sales training manual, but genuinely, warmly, in the moments when it adds specificity and connection, remembering and referencing small details from previous conversations. Laughing when something is genuinely funny and not laughing when it is not, because authentic laughter is connective and performed laughter is instantly detectable and quietly corrosive to trust. There is a fourth element that sits beneath all three components of charisma and makes them possible, and it is the one that no behavioral framework can manufacture or replace. It is genuine interest in people as people, not in what they can do for you, not in how they make you look, not in the connection as a transaction or a networking asset, but in the actual, specific, irreplaceable human being who has somehow ended up in the same room as you on this particular Tuesday, with their particular history and their particular dreams and their particular way of laughing when something surprises them. Maya Angelou, poet, memoirist, and one of the most beloved human beings in American cultural history, said something that belongs permanently in the foundation of everything in this chapter. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That is the entire charisma code, distilled to its irreducible core. You do not need to be spectacular. You do not need to be extraordinary. You need to make the people you encounter feel, genuinely, specifically, memorably, that being in your presence was worth something. That they were seen. That they were heard. That they mattered to you, not as a category, not as a contact, but as a human being. That is what the person at the beginning of this chapter does. That is why you remember them the way you do. And that is exactly what you now have the tools to become. Here is your practical tool for this chapter. And it is the most important one in the entire audiobook. For the next 7 days, enter every meaningful conversation with one explicit intention: to make the other person feel more valuable, more understood, and more capable at the end of the interaction than they did at the beginning. Not by flattering them, not by performing interest, by actually bringing the presence, the power, and the warmth that together create the experience of genuine connection. Do that consistently for 7 days and observe what changes, not just in how people respond to you, but in how you feel about yourself, your relationships, and the extraordinary ordinary conversations that make up an entire human life. In Chapter 10, we are bringing everything home. Every tool from every chapter, every insight, every framework, every practical technique, synthesized into the clearest, most actionable picture of who you are becoming as a communicator and what you do with that now that the audiobook is almost over. This final chapter is the one that makes everything else stick. Stay with us. Chapter 10. The conversation of your life. Bringing it all together. There is a moment that happens near the end of every truly great conversation. You probably know the one. The coffee has gone cold. The restaurant around you has quietly emptied out. The clock on your phone says something that makes no sense because it feels like you sat down 20 minutes ago and somehow 2 hours have disappeared. And there is this specific, warm, almost reluctant feeling as both of you start to gather yourselves. The feeling of not quite wanting it to end. Of having been somewhere real with another person. Of having said things and heard things that mattered. Of having, for a sustained and genuine stretch of time, actually connected. That feeling is not an accident. That feeling is the result of two people bringing their full selves, their attention, their curiosity, their honesty, their willingness to be present, into the same space at the same time. And what this entire audiobook has been building, from the very first chapter to this one, is your ability to create that feeling. Deliberately, consistently, in any conversation with any person in any room. You are not the same communicator you were when you pressed play. Let's make sure you know exactly why, and exactly what you are carrying forward. In Chapter 1, we dismantled the most dangerous lie in the entire world of human communication. The belief that great conversationalists are born and not made. We introduced the growth mindset framework from Dr. Carol Dweck and established the foundational truth that every skill you admire in a magnetic communicator was developed, not gifted. We gave you the pre-conversation reset, the 30-second practice of shifting your focus from self to other before any interaction begins. That reset alone, applied consistently, will change the texture of every conversation you walk into for the rest of your life. In Chapter 2, we built the conversation engine, the three-component mental framework that ensures you never again find yourself stranded in silence, scrambling for words, wishing you were somewhere else. Ford+1 gave you an endlessly renewable source of conversational fuel. The thread and expand technique showed you how to mine every answer for the 3 invisible directions it contains. And the callback technique revealed how circling back to something said earlier creates the specific experience of depth and continuity that makes an interaction feel less like an exchange and more like a genuine meeting of two minds. In Chapter 3, we went somewhere most communication books never go. Not into what to say, but into how to truly hear. We named the 3 listening traps that quietly destroy more conversations than any awkward silence ever could. Autobiographical listening, solution listening, and reloading listening. We introduced reflective listening, emotional acknowledgement, strategic silence, and eye contact calibration. And we gave you a 5-minute challenge that, practiced once, is enough to show you how profoundly different a conversation feels when someone is actually completely listening. In Chapter 4, we transformed the way you ask questions. We drew the line between dead-end questions and open-door questions, and gave you the single most powerful structural upgrade available to any conversationalist. Swapping did and do for what and how and tell me about. We introduced the iceberg technique for going beneath the surface of any answer into the real story living underneath. We brought in Professor Alison Wood-Brooks' research on follow-up questions as validation. And we added the values question and the hypothetical question to your permanent toolkit. 2 question types that bypass rehearsed answers and access the fresher, more revealing, more genuinely human layer of who people actually are. In Chapter 5, we gave you the structure of story. Situation, struggle, resolution, the 3-part skeleton that has held every compelling narrative in human history together, from ancient campfire tales to the most watched Netflix series of last year. We layered on sensory specificity, the pause before the payoff, and the universal hook, the sentence that carries a specific personal experience into a shared human truth, which is where real connection is born. And we addressed the fear most people carry quietly, that their own stories are not interesting enough, with the truth that extraordinary storytelling requires not extraordinary experience but extraordinary attention to the experiences you already have. In Chapter 6, we walked into the territory most people spend enormous energy avoiding, the difficult conversations. We reframed the awkward silence from evidence of failure to a natural beat in the rhythm of real human interaction. We gave you 3 principles for navigating sensitive topics without detonating them. Separating the person from the position, naming what is happening without weaponizing it, and knowing your purpose before opening your mouth. And we introduced the steel man technique, articulating the strongest version of the opposing view before offering your own, as the single most disarming and trust-building move available in any disagreement. In Chapter 7, we took everything into the highest pressure rooms. The job interview, the first date, the cold introduction to someone who intimidates you. We established that evaluative threat hijacks exactly the cognitive resources you most need, and that the goal is not to eliminate the pressure but to channel it through a clear framework. We gave you the specific strategies. The curiosity-driven interview that transforms interrogation into dialogue, the first date principle of going first with something real, and the 3-second mental reset combined with one specific, knowledge-rooted opening sentence for approaching the intimidating introduction. In Chapter 8, we descended into the silent conversation, the world of body language, mirroring, micro-expressions, vocal tone, and the non-verbal signals that reveal more about a person's inner state in 30 seconds than their words reveal in 30 minutes. We established the cluster and context rule as the antidote to the oversimplified signal-to-meaning shortcuts that lead most people astray. We introduced postural openness, the mirroring phenomenon, strategic eye contact, and the vocal pace and register techniques that communicate confidence, warmth, and authority before a single word of content has been delivered. In Chapter 9, we cracked the charisma code, and found something genuinely liberating inside it. Olivia Fox-Caban's research revealed that charisma is not a personality type but a behavioral system built on 3 pillars: presence, power, and warmth. We gave you the immersion reset for presence, Amy Cuddy's postural research for power, and the high-quality listening behaviors: name use, genuine laughter, remember details, slow deliberate nodding, for warmth. And we closed with Maya Angelou's defining truth: that people will forget what you said and what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Now here is what all of it adds up to. And this is the most important thing in the entire audiobook, so stay with every word. Every skill in every chapter points at the same target. Every technique, every framework, every research finding, every practical tool. All of it is aimed at one single outcome: the ability to make another human being feel genuinely seen, genuinely heard, and genuinely valued in your presence. That is what conversation is actually for. Not the exchange of information. We have email for that. Not the performance of likability. We have social media for that. Conversation, real conversation, exists for the oldest and most essential purpose in human experience: to close the distance between people. To take 2 separate, private, inward-facing human beings and create, briefly, beautifully, impermanently, a moment of actual contact between them. And the extraordinary truth about that purpose is that it does not require perfection. It does not require you to remember every technique from every chapter simultaneously. It does not require you to be the wittiest or the smoothest or the most sophisticated person in the room. It requires only that you show up, genuinely, attentively, curiously, and care more about the person in front of you than about the impression you are making. Everything else follows from that. Here is your final practical tool, not for one conversation, but for the next chapter of your life as a communicator. It is a simple 3-question self-assessment you can run at the end of any meaningful interaction. Ask yourself, did the other person do most of the talking? Did they seem more energized at the end of the conversation than at the beginning? Did they share something real, something beyond the surface version of their life? If the answer to all 3 is yes, you did your job. Not perfectly, maybe, but truly. Run that assessment consistently, and over time it will do something remarkable. It will shift your entire frame of reference in conversation from "how did I come across?" to "how did they feel?" And that shift, quiet as it sounds, is the single most transformative move available to any human being who wants to build a life rich with genuine connection. You started this audiobook because something in the opening words touched a real place. The part of you that has felt invisible in a conversation, that has frozen up at the wrong moment, that has watched someone else connect effortlessly and wondered why it felt so hard. That part of you was not broken. It was untrained. And now it has the training. The next conversation you have, whether it is in an hour or tomorrow morning or next week, will be different. Not because you are a different person. Because you are finally bringing your whole self to the table, with the tools to let that self land the way it was always capable of landing. Go have that conversation. And if this audiobook gave you even one tool that changes the way you connect with the people in your life, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a comment telling us which chapter hit hardest. Subscribe to Mindset Audiobooks, because we are building something here, a library of the most powerful personal development content available anywhere. And every single week we bring you something new that is worth your time. Thank you for listening to every word. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end.